So, Teomnes, I am Ruminus, and today we are talking about the overall idea of mechanics in a video game. Mechanics are the more passive system in the game. Mechanics include things which the player cannot overtly or directly control, but does have some influence over. Mechanics overlap between gameplay, visuals, and difficulty, but that's because it directly impacts the gameplay. Mechanics includes factors such as variables, stats, frame data for both enemies and the player, how the game recognizes the actions, consistency for those actions, and the interconnection of the story and gameplay. This is not an extensive list, but basically it is anything that is running in the programming in the background that has been designed into the game to guide the gameplay to a certain result. Basically, it's anything that happens in the game that the player doesn't have a button to do. You might have sliders, you might have options, but it's not a direct button that you can play for the gameplay. To give a more clear example of a mechanic, I'll use a very common visual mechanic in games with exploration. Vibrant colors or pathways to the next area. Parkour was a very popular aspect in games during the 2000s into the early 2010s, and developers needed to guide the players into what they could climb without directly stating it, nor having no clue whatsoever. Therefore, Mirror's Edge and similar games decided to give all climbable objects and pathways a vibrant color to guide the players, and also Mirror's Edge gives an option to turn the colors off, which makes the use of the coloring very clear. Especially in tense situations, it is difficult to find the exact pathway without some help, so this mechanic is employed. For my analysis, I will break the mechanics into reliable, manipulative, assistive, detrimental, guiding, intuitive, and thematic mechanics. Reliable mechanics maintain their consistency across the game and can be relied on to happen no matter the situation. The booklet in Uncharted 2 will always give the solution to the interactive puzzles. Manipulative mechanics entail any aspect of the game where the player or the game has clear, evident, declarative influence on something, but cannot have direct control at any time with a button. Difficulty, audio, and visual sliders are the most abundant, but the chems from Fallout 4 give the player better stats at the potential of addiction. And also the amount of ammo given in The Last of Us will change depending on how much the player currently has. These are all manipulative because they are manipulated based on certain situations. Assistive are mechanics which helps the player win, even if it is unclear or unknown. I Am Bread will clearly give invincibility juice if the player fails too many times in one level, whereas Siphon Filter gives the player a bit of lenience when doing stealth, allowing about a second in an enemy line of sight before being caught. Still a little obvious, but it's a little less clear. Detrimental includes mechanics which challenge or prevent the player from winning. Sonic the Hedgehog will remove all but the last 10 rings when injured, making it difficult to get to 100, but not impossible to recover health. Guiding is a mechanic which directs the player to an action, area, or similar situation. Phoenotopia will have secrets hidden behind cracked walls or odd aspects of the background, and Silent Hill has a grid-like design with distinct buildings to orient the character in the dense fog. Intuitive mechanics compel the player to try new or advanced tricks and help build the skills of the player. Doodle God will directly tell the players to mess around with a thing logically to create new elements, whereas the Witness teaches all of its puzzles without any bit of dialogue or explanation text. Thematic are mechanics fitting into the theme or setting of the world, characters, and situation. The suit for Master Chief gives him shields for regenerating health and helps grant super strength to just toss military-grade vehicles like ice cream cones. I'm glad that everybody's just standing around letting this happen. Yeah, don't do anything, everybody. Mechanics can merge and change across the game. In order to make these variables less jarring or annoying, it is best to make them subtle. You don't want the assistive mechanic to be obvious and let the player know that they are hot garbage. You don't want the detrimental to feel like you are torturing the player. Games are all about putting control into the player's hands. If that control is noticeably tinkered with, it can take them out of the groove. People always talk about immersion, which I'll get to in a second, but that's what mechanics do. Mechanics are what put the idea of control, then immersion, into the mentality of the player. Therefore, if the mechanics are off, the game feels off. This doesn't mean that the game isn't fun or engaging, but that there will be blips where the game is odd. Explosive barrels popping up everywhere in ancient ruins and jungles, enemies starting to suddenly stop attacking the player or ease off, the clear visual guides are suddenly missing and make you wander for thousands of years to find the stupid exit. Resident Evil 4 exemplifies this very well with the island section where all of a sudden the enemies have guns, spotlights, grenades, and mom jokes. I'll talk about the buzzword immersion. For some reason, some developers, critics, players, bloggers, and centaurs believe that a player will be so engrossed in a game that they become one with the game. This will never happen until augmented reality is so astonishingly perfect that we can't literally distinguish between the virtual and real world. Immersion is not engaged but drawn into the world and situation of the game. They will never forget that there is a controller in their hand or that the game is a bunch of ones and zeros. They will always know that the game is just a game, but the goal of immersion is to make the player feel as if the game's world is alive, reacting to what the player is doing. This is why the autonomy aspect of gameplay and intuitive mechanics are so important. They remove the clear strings that show that this is just a game and give an illusion that this is a living world. The player should be just like that, playing the character. Just like in a movie, people can get engrossed in great acting, players can also get engrossed in great mechanics and gameplay, but they ultimately know that they are in a fake world. Engagement is all about the player continuing to enjoy the game and keep playing, where immersion is about making the story, environment, world, and characters feel alive and connected. Learning the combos in Killer Instinct can be engaging for those who love fighting games, but no one in the world can convince me that a player forgets that it's a game while spending 7 hours trying to get one combo to work while missing the 1/16th of a second window to connect the hits.
Cole, come take a look at this.
Someone didn't finish painting the door. Meanwhile, a player can be immersed in the mystery of an LA Noire case, but annoyed or disinterested in actually playing the game.
Nice going, Shadow.
I didn't even do anything, that was all you! Shadow the Hedgehog is a third-person shooter, platformer, and racing game? The game is a conglomerate of different styles, which shows in its lackluster mechanics. For Reliable, the goal of the levels is often unclear until directly stated later on. It will give a heroic, neutral, or evil mission, which are different every time. This could help make the game feel fresh, but it often doesn't work with the gameplay. The gameplay is both super speed actions and violent murder actions. Mega Man and Mario excel at this and are very well known for this. The missions will vary wildly in Shadow the Hedgehog. Sometimes you collect things, which takes grueling hours to find anything. Sometimes you kill everything in your path. Sometimes you tell yo mama jokes to Sonic and his friends to let everyone know how cool you are. The levels may have a plethora of loops and fast running bits, or be enclosed in a cavern or army base. For Manipulative, the player can interact with items in the first level, but not really much after that except for some missions. The player can get rings for health and change weapons, but the weapons are all equally, generally just as useful. For Assistive, the game gives a homing beacon to the jump attack, but will often send you flying into your death. The game also has a lock-on for the weapons to make them viable, but the problem with this is that there's really no challenge because they're too powerful. There are health bars for the enemies, but you really don't need to see that because again, the guns will kill them in a couple hits usually, except for the bosses. For Detrimental, like most games in the series, if you're hit, the rings will fall out of Shadow and only 10 will appear for a short time. After death, all stats and progress are reverted back to the last checkpoint. There are plenty of pits and insta-kill areas to help reinforce this and make a little bit of a challenge in the game, and honestly I think most of the detrimental mechanics are fair. For guiding, the game has an objective counter for the missions, but the player doesn't really get to choose. These items will come and go throughout the level, making missing these items possible, and forgetting what the objective is quite possible as well. The levels are sometimes designed straightforward, but most are open, copy-pasted areas and textures and difficult to navigate. Missions with finding objects is impossible as finding a needle in a haystack. Endless wandering and pixel hunting, just trying to find this weird little thing. The game has no real sense of guiding to push the player along to the exit or to the main objectives. For Intuitive, the game is explicit in its controls but doesn't force the player to actually do them. The game has large question mark bubbles that will give dialogue explaining the different buttons, and there will be different button prompts that appear at special events. The bubbles are not mandatory, and I would say it is an intuitively enticing thing to go into the first one, then the player knows what they are. The player will have the autonomy to kind of try it out for themselves before getting to the bubble, and they should have enough foundation to kind of understand what to do without these bubbles. Story-wise, the good and evil missions make sense, although the neutral is usually weird or just kind of there. It seems like it's forced in. For thematic, this is where I struggle to clarify on the objective versus subjective manner. Objectively, it doesn't fit with the rest of the series, where it's cartoonish, you gotta go fast, there's hardly any violence, and Eggman dies like an inflatable car salesman. In this game, there's no need to proceed with celerity, platforming everywhere slows you down, and the hover shoes don't move faster than light. Subjectively, Shadow is a darker, more aggressive hedgehog, so guns make sense. His bloodlust and need to curse like a sailor would make more sense in this context. He doesn't want or need to be Sonic's rival, which kinda doesn't make sense based on the rest of his story, but the main villain is often manipulating him, and Shadow is too smart or too cool for that. Again, it doesn't really fit with the rest of the series based on Shadow's character. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a horror game with pretty decent mechanics throughout its game. The game is beloved for its uniquity, at the time, and the general atmosphere of creepiness. For Reliable, the lighting, puzzles, enemies, stats, and areas are all similar in how they operate throughout the game. The game is designed to be dark, forcing the player to use the lantern and matches to light certain areas. The enemies will deal a few hits before killing, and there will always be a key, gear, soul of a lost child that needs to be obtained in progress. When candles are lit, they stay lit. After completing a section, the sanity will replenish. For Manipulative, the player can replenish health, lantern oil, and also light candles which alter the environment and situations. It doesn't have many, but it also doesn't need many. There are plenty of puzzles throughout the game, but those are gameplay, not mechanics, because they don't alter the stats or really anything about the game. For Assistive, the light sources help the player see in the dark world, but are also integral to limiting the effects of insanity, which happen when sitting in the dark for too long. There are certain points where, if the player dies, enemies will disappear, helping the player navigate later on. Other times, it will push the enemy farther away, again giving the player a little more breathing room, or just helping the player out in investigating the area without too much tension or danger. For Detrimental, staying in darkness will increase insanity, causing hallucinations and making the game a bit harder or more tense. There is a limited amount of lantern oil and matches, meaning that being too slow and afraid will make the game harder. Enemies will block the way sometimes, and staring at enemies causes insanity as well, making the player to focus elsewhere and not really know where the enemies are. For Guiding, the levels are very polygonal and straightforward, however they are also very bland and dark. Each hub has a landmark to help orient the player, and later on in the game enemies will help show the right direction. Areas don't need to be backtracked, which helps in knowing that you can move forward. Notes and journals will tell exactly what is needed to continue, and the matches also work as a gameplay aspect with Guiding since you know where you've already been. For Intuitive, there are no NPCs, so anything moving is definitely trying to kill you. There are light sources in the game, but they are limited. The game will show you in the very beginning that you will have multiple light sources and candles, but you'll have a very limited amount of matches, so lighting everything and using it is always a problem. For Thematic, the game is set in the 19th century, so the lack of electricity makes sense. Resources are limited, but makes sense why they're scattered throughout the mansion. The main character is an alchemist or researcher and not a fighter. Although parts of his past show aggression, he has guilt and doesn't intend to kill, so attacking these enemies is foolish. The main character has no memory, wakes up in a haunted mansion, so the demonic enemies and haunting shadow with insanity darkness make sense. Mechanics are the hidden or coded parts of the game. Where gameplay is all about the buttons and responses, mechanics are the options, sliders, and numbers. Some mechanics are entirely hidden, while others are shown just enough, or a lot, to show how the game will operate. If possible, you want to link your story, setting, and mechanics together, as it will help the world feel a little more realistic and help with immersion and engagement. You want to guide the player along, as wandering aimlessly looking for the next objective or area is frustrating. Don't have a character repeat what to do every 10 seconds. The player heard it, but is investigating the area. It's okay to limit the player or give them a boost, but make sure that it's not overwhelming or very evident when it doesn't need to be. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified of future videos. If you have any constructive criticism of things that I missed, things that you agree with, things that you may disagree with, or games that either are good or bad mechanics, please put them in the comment section below so that we can continue this discourse. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week with the idea of reliable mechanics. Until then, walete omnes.